Tom, thank you very kindly for a wonderful introduction. Another one. I can't tell you how pleased I am to be back on this stage so soon again. We were extended every courtesy on campus last night. We appreciate it so much. My wife and I both did. And we thank you for your hospitality. And again, it's a privilege to be able to be part of this Manley lecture series. Tom mentioned my background, my Texas background. You may not know my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. My dad was the last of her 8 children, and of course I'm about as old as Methuselah too. So my grandmother came to Texas in a wagon train in 1881 with her parents, my great-grandparents, and she told me about that. She was 7 years old, and she became a farm wife, and this was the most vivid thing that ever happened to her. And she told me the story of that trek. Oh my goodness! Every time I'd see a Western movie as a boy and see covered wagons, well, I think of my grandmother. I think, well, my people did that. On the other side of my family, they had come earlier than that. This is a trail crew. This is pertinent to what we're talking about today. This is a trail boss named Pink Higgins. And Pink could be a very dangerous man. He was raised on the frontier around Lampasas, in Lampasas County. And he grew up fighting Indians from the time he was about junior high age. Of course, there weren't any junior highs around there. But he was fighting Indians and rustlers and so forth from an early day, and he became quite a gunman, as a matter of fact. He was a top-tier gunman. But he had 9 kids in the course of his life, and so White Earp never had any, Wild Bill Hickok never had any, and he didn't kill quite as many as some of those other guys. On the other hand, he had more kids than any other gunfighter, and he was in middle age when he was converted in a ghost town now called Claremont, and he was so excited about the process, he still had several kids at home, that he said, "Preacher, wait right here," and he went out to his ranch and got the 3 or 4 kids that were still there and brought them back and had them baptized. But in any event, my great-grandfather was part of his crew. This is about 1870-something, up in Abilene, and they had the cowboys loved to have their pictures taken. And my great-grandfather's name was Jeff Stanton, and he was the real deal. He cowboyed in the trail driving days, and then his son, my grandfather, was Will Standard, and he had 8 kids too. Each of my parents were one of 8, and one of his daughters he named after this guy, Jesse Standard, his father. And I have a granddaughter who has that same name now, Jessie Lucille, after her. But anyway, my grandfather, this picture was taken in the 1890s. And he loved cowboying, but once he got married and started having kids, he had to get out of it to find steadier work. But he did it for a while, and he also trained horses throughout his life. One of his sons made this tool belt that I've got on, and was a master saddle maker. So I'm very proud of my family cowboy heritage. There was a ranch in Burnett County that was my favorite place to go as a kid. I still like to go out there. My uncle's ranch, and there was my uncle's grandfather killed a cowboy. There was a shootout on the ranch, and he killed a guy, I think, in 1884 out there, and they still got the gun. So I really enjoy all that kind of thing. Texans spread the cowboy culture throughout the entire West and then to the world. As I mentioned last night, cowboys have become the world's #1 folk hero. But it all started with the Spanish, which is why I have some of this stuff on. Spanish introduced actually they introduced cattle to this entire hemisphere, and horses as well. And they had these explorations across the Southwest, and the horses would sometimes stray away, and they found the entire Southwest, a wonderful breeding ground. And before long, there were all these huge herds of wild Mustangs, and that's how we got the horse population in this country. The cattle, a little bit different story. Cattle also were introduced to the hemisphere by the Spanish, and a lot of them came up into Texas because they had haciendas and ranchos in Mexico. We had 25 missions in Texas, and I really like that. California gets a lot of publicity for its missions from the movies and stuff, they only had 22. We had 25. Texans, again, have the richest and most colorful history, and we like to be biggest and best. You know what we've been? I'll tell you what, I've got one of those I'll tell you in just a minute about our biggest thing. But in any event, we did have 25 missions, and some of them had, all of them had cattle herds, and some of them huge ones. One of them had 15,000 head of cattle, another 10,000 head of cattle. And as they drove these cattle up into Texas from Mexico, across the Rio Grande, here's what happened. You have the Gulf of Mexico on one side, and you have the Rio Grande, a much larger river than it is today, coming down and feeding into the Gulf of Mexico. And about 130 or 40 miles up, you had the Nueces River. And that sort of topped off a triangle. Nobody lived down there. They called it El Desierto de los Muertos, the desert of the dead. It was a very barren area. And as they drove these cattle herds up through this harsh land, some of the cows strayed off. And since they were in a natural corral, admittedly a huge one, millions and millions and millions of acres, they, in time, bred up. See, those first drives were made in the 1500s. And in time, by about the time of the American Civil War, there were about 5 million longhorns down there in that natural corral. They didn't belong to anybody. They had longhorns because, like any wild animal, they had to have some kind of defense. And so that just evolved. So there were these cows, and when we decided to start making those cattle drives up to the north, where the beef market was, all you had to do was come down and cut out about as many of those things as you thought you could drive and handle them. Now, how do you handle them? We had learned all of that from the Hispanics. They not only introduced cattle and horses, they showed us the techniques of handling cattle. They had the techniques and the equipment and the clothes and so forth, and we learned all of that from them. The clothes, my goodness. They had these great big sombreros, which is the cowboy's umbrella. They were vaqueros. Let me show you something. Some of you can see this. I use this usually in smaller venues, and I'm sorry I didn't blow it up some way, but anyway, the Spanish word for cow is vaca, and so the guys who handle cows were called vaqueros. Now, a lot of times, we didn't know what they were saying. We heard them say vaqueros and stuff, so we said, hey, we Americanized that into buckaroo. La Reata. La Reata meant the road. And again, and you know, the vaqueros spoke very rapidly, and they were La Reata. And so we thought it was one word, and we started calling it a lariat. When the vaqueros, back east and in Europe, the saddles are little bitty light things that are supposed to be easy on the horses. And the vaqueros are going to be in the saddle 14 hours a day, maybe more. You might have to ride 2 hours a night herd, and so you spend much of your day in the saddle. And so they came up with these great big stock saddles, and I bought this one for my daughter when she was a teenager, so it's not particularly large, but the big old Western stock saddles were for the ease of the guy. This is the cowboy's workbench. And so they had those things. Now, when you rope a cow, for whatever reason, the end of the rope, when the big old calf or something goes trying to bust off from it, you wrap it around the saddle horn. That's what that saddle horn's for, not to grab it while you're trying to ride, although it is handy. I find myself grabbing it more all the time as I age. But in any event, the reason for that saddle horn is to wrap that loose end of rope around it. All right? The Spanish verb for that, as you can see over here, is 3 words: dar la vuelta. Dar la vuelta. Well, we heard say dar la vuelta. You know, and we thought, what does it say? And so we just started calling that dowling. And so when the rodeo cowboys do that kind of thing, they're just dowling the rope. They had to have these heavy leather leggings because working in that brush country that I've described to you, cactus and hard, everything had thorns and stuff, would just tear up your pants and then your legs. And so they wore these very heavy leather leggings, chapaneros, and we call them chaps. And then you can make a kind of bridle out of a rope, crude thing, and it works just fine. You just do a few turns, and all of a sudden you have a hakima, they call it. And we Americanized it to hackamore. Rancho is ranch, lasso, rodeo, and mustino, mustang. And then you can see some of them that didn't even change at all. The word corral, the word bronco, the word ramuda, all of those things we use to say. So just the language gives some suggestion of the connection between the Hispanic and the Anglo-Vaqueros. The clothes the same way. Now I've got a pair of high heel boots on, but you'll notice not just the heels, but also the narrow cut of this thing. There's a reason for both of them. When you're riding on a horse and he's moving fast and you're having to cut him and so forth, well then you need to be able to have those boot heels buried in the stirrup, because otherwise, if you wear just a pair of walking shoes, your foot will slip down and all of a sudden the stirrups up around your ankle and you're in a mess. So that's what the heel is about. Another thing is this: if you get thrown, and anybody rides a horse can be thrown, I don't care how good you are, you want to be able to slip that boot, that narrow cut, you want to slip that boot out of the stirrup, or that horse will just drag you to death. They think, what's this thing hanging on me? And then off they go. And so that's part of it. Let's see, what else? They have these woven vests, and the woven vest is, it gives you a little extra warmth or something, but it leaves your sleeveless. It leaves your hands free to rope and so forth. And so they have that. Well, I'll tell you, we started Americanizing that stuff, and here we came with our broad brimmed hat. And these things, since we're talking about Texas cowboys, I know my great-grandfather, generally, as he was an older man, he always wore his hat 10-gallon style. And there's a reason for that. If you see Bonanza, you see old Hoss Cartwright wearing one of those 10-gallon hats. But if you look at old photos, you see an awful lot of those guys wearing 10-gallon hats. And there's a reason for this. If there's not any water around, you can get your canteen off and pour it in there, and the horse can drink. The horse can't drink out of canteens, but he can drink out of this. Or you can put some oats in there, and the horse can eat out of that. If it's real hot, you can wet your bandana down and wad it, put it on top of your head and under that hat, and that cools it. So you see this kind of hat, and you're talking about somebody who's probably from Texas. Texas 10-gallon. This was a Spanish Chihuahua spur. Look at that big old thing. It's several inches from here to here, and that's about as big as you can have and buckle onto your boot and be able to walk around. But I've seen them in museums more than twice this size. I've seen some that are 12 inches, and the rowels are very sharp. And that kind of a rowel is so big that you can't buckle these on until you get in the saddle. And boy, they can really work over a horse with these things. Well, Texans, we brag that we're better. We don't need that. We don't need something like that. And we came up with this. And this is, you can see it, this is a Texas Lone Star rowel. Each of the rowels is just a Texas Lone Star, and it's blunted. And we said, this is all we need for a horse. And of course, we like to walk around and brag about the Texas Lone Star. And you can see, if you saw a cowboy wearing his hat with a kind of a Smokey the Bear crease, they called it a Montana Peak. If you see it like that, and he's wearing a pair of woolly chaps instead of leather, wool against the cold, well, he's probably for cowboys in Wyoming or Montana. A guy up in Kansas or Nebraska might get their hat and run the crown down about as far as they could, and then flatten out the brim as well, because the sun comes down real hard. Sun comes down real hard, and you've got a crown down like this, it won't blow off. So you can actually tell these guys by what they were wearing. If you saw a guy wearing a sombrero and a pair of Chihuahua spurs, well, he probably cowboyed maybe in New Mexico or someplace. But you see that 10-gallon thing and these kind of spurs, well, you know where he's from there. Now let's see, what else do I have on? Oh, let me shut this and show you the evolution of this is a canvas vest, and you can see them in old Sears Roebuck's catalogs from the Monkey Ward, they call them, or Montgomery Ward catalogs from the 1800s. They had the ranchman's vest. They'd have suit vests, but they'd have the ranchman's vest. And the reason for this is, now that wool vest I pulled off had two pockets right here. You're sitting in a saddle, and it's hard to get into your pockets. So you put everything here. Now, I'm way too old to be a working cowboy and everything, so I still wear my ranchman's vest. I've got a watch. I'm probably the only guy, around that needs one. So I've got my pocket watch here, and I've got a little tally book, a little stub of a pencil I carry there. I got some horseshoes in the bottom of this pocket, horseshoe nails, not horseshoes. I got some horseshoe nails right there. And if I were going to shoot a horse, I'd roll up these cuffs and fill them with horseshoe nails. And while I'm working on those shoes, whenever I need some more nails, I just reach into the cuff and put them there. So that's why you see those rolled cuffs sometimes. I don't remember what I got in here. But got some state historic cards in here. Right? That's not authentic. So beg your pardon on that. I'm not even going to talk about that. Out of deference to where we are, I was afraid a lightning bolt would hit me or Dr. Smith might come run me off stage. I did not wear my 6-gun and cartridge belt. I had something to show with that, but I thought, uh-oh, I might get in trouble. So I didn't come armed. We picked this up from the Spanish, by the way. And I don't see where my branding iron went. I got a branding iron up here somewhere, and I don't see it. I want to show you something about it, too. I brought it in. I heard it bang around, but oh, here it is. This is what they branded with. And I'll show you something. You notice how they had the weld, a brand face on this iron. Okay, you see how this is curved? A lot of guys, rustlers, would just carry a curved thing, a little short thing with a little handle on it right about here. And basically what they would do is heat that up right there, and they could actually change some of these brands. And let me show you what I'm talking about. You read a brand, top to bottom, outside in, left to right. So that's a circle in brand, and that is my brand. All I've ever had was a quarter horse to put that on, and I was afraid he'd kick me to death if I did, so I never did brand anything but wood with it. We had a lot of pets, rabbits and stuff, but I was afraid I'd kill them if I branded them. I wanted to. All of these are registered brands in Texas, top to bottom, left to right, bar, BQ. Now, I'll tell you something about that bar thing. Ranch kids, by the time they started going to school, they already knew their alphabet. They'd already learned that off of brands. But what they had a problem with was the bar and the cross. Because when the teacher started trying to teach them the first steps of simple math, they said, no, that's a bar. Minus, what are you talking about? It's not a minus, it's a bar. That's not a plus, that's a cross. So anyway, one of the great ranches of the West was the story went that Burt Burnett won the first part of it with a Pocahontas 4.6s. But anyway, it's a 4.6s brand. Now, the brand would not have 4.6s, it would be a 6. So you'd have to kind of hold that cow down and go 1, 2, 3, 4, hit him 4 times with that. One guy defended his range with his Colt 45, and that was his brand. Another Texan said, oh man, it's just too hot to do all this stuff. And he put that all over the side of his cows, and another one had this all over the side of his cows. And a rancher named T.J. Walker, with the crazy prices and all the problems he had and everything, he said, a man's a fool to raise cows, and he stuck that all over his cows. And then, if you have, here's a rocking 7, and here is here's a swinging 7, and you get a running iron, and you might could make say a 3/4 7 out of it or something like that. That's how they altered these things. Here is a flying 7. Here's a crazy R. Here is a tumbling F. This is a sleepy F. And this is a here's walking S, and here's a drag S. You still have to be careful. Here is a diamond brand. Whoops. Yeah, this is a diamond brand. And then a guy could get a running iron and alter it and make a diamond and a half out of it. This is a guy named J.H. Barwise, B-A-R-W-I-S-E. He was a big rancher up in northwest Texas. And this says his name, Bar and 2 Y's, Barwise. This is the biggest ranch ever. This was 3 million acres up in the Texas Panhandle. It wasn't all that wide, several miles wide. It kind of zigzagged and 200 miles long. Now I know when I would tell this to my classes in Carthage, from Carthage is 200 miles from Carthage to Fort Worth, or 200 miles from Carthage to Waco. And they can identify, I don't know how far 200 miles is from here. Houston maybe, or Galveston, I don't know. Boy, that is one long ranch. They decided to fence it and cross-fence it into divisions. It was just too big to work with. They had 7 divisions. And so when they did that, it took 6,000 miles of barbed wire to do a 3-strand fence all over that ranch. Now, to put that in perspective, from the east coast of this nation to the west coast is 3,000 miles. And it took 6,000 miles, one way and back, to fence this ranch in. When they were doing that, you can imagine how many gates they had to have on a ranch that size. There was a railroad car came in with just a whole boxcar load of hinges, gate hinges. So that's the big boy. That's the biggest one of all. They built that. The company that did this accepted the 3 million acres from the state of Texas to build a brand new state capitol, our 1856 one that burned in '81. And so the state of Texas offered 3 million acres to any company that would come and build us a state capitol. Well, they built a whopper. There's none more beautiful than our state capitol. And of course, by design, Texans, we had to have a dome taller than anybody else's dome. And when we built it, we found out it was only 7 feet shorter than the dome in Washington, D.C. And so what we did was get a 14-foot Statue of Liberty and put it on top of there, and now ours is 7 feet taller than theirs. There was a guy out in West Texas whose initials were IC, and there was a neighbor that was rustling his cow. This was his brand, and a neighbor kept rustling his cows. And what he did, he'd bring them to his range and add this onto it as ICU. You can have as many brands as you want, so old IC got him, went and registered another brand and rustled them back. ICU too. Now, you know, all of this seems colorful and exotic. And when you added the long trail drives, great huge ranches and so forth, the great adventure, the American public was simply captivated by all of this. Pecos in West Texas claimed to have staged the very first rodeo in 1883. Rodeos did much to popularize the cowboy thing. There was the only rodeo event that they know where it started was from a young black cowboy in Taylor, Texas. And they used to have bulldogs that would run up and jump up and grab the lower lip of the cows, and then they could lead them around anywhere they wanted to go. They were trained to do that. And Pickett was just captivated by that, and he decided he could do it. He was a very athletic kid. He was only about 10 years old, and he started running out and jumping over and biting the lower lip. And this little 10-year-old kid is leading those cows around. And eventually, as rodeo, by the time he grew up, here came rodeos. And so he got into the rodeo event, and after a while, they had him biting and leading around every kind of animal you can imagine. You know, not just cows, but all kinds of other things. And he lost a lot of teeth in the course of his career. And he started jumping off on cows and grabbing the horns and turning them down. That's called bulldogging. And he's the one who did that. Western movies took the, oh boy, we're talking about rodeos, Western movies. Westerns just moved. You had galloping horses, Indian attacks, saloon brawls, and westerns were fun. The very first movie that told a story was a western in 1903. During the first half of the 20th century, I mentioned this last night, Hollywood filmed 300 western movies a year, doing great stuff to popularize them. There were western novels, starting with Zane Grey, who was phenomenally popular, all the way to Larry McMurtry and his Lonesome Dove that won the Pulitzer Prize. Western music and art, all of it popularized by the cowboy. And I was just as captivated by anyone at all of this. I've written books about famous ranches and old cattle towns and the range wars and gunfighters and such. My most recent book is West Texas Cattle Kingdom. It is a pictorial account of Texas cowboys, longhorns, Texas ranchers, trail riders. And ladies, cowgirls, by the way. Ranchers' daughters rode horses and roped and branded and sometimes had to work trail rides. If you ever get a chance to see the National Cowgirl Hall of Fame in Fort Worth, it is a state-of-the-art museum dedicated to the cowgirl. There were cowgirls all over the place in Lubbock 3 weeks ago when I spoke on a range war out at the National Cowboy Symposium Hall of Fame. That thing is in its 16th year, and it's a big deal. It's really something to see. Next weekend, I'm doing a program for Texas history teachers in Harlingen on the King Ranch, most famous of all ranches. It's about 800,000 acres today, but 825,000, but it was 1,150,000 acres at one point, and it was had 90-something thousand head of cows and 30,000 head of horses and so forth. And then next month, I'm speaking to the National Convention of Chuck Wagon Cooks. I've got to tell you one thing I want to mention to them. Some of them will know this, but some of them won't. Gail Borden was a Texan who came up with the method of evaporating milk. And cowboys were just astounded at this. That Borden milk, they called it canned cow. And they loved it. You could get milk out of this, you know, they were just astounded. And they came up with a little ditty because, see, this kept them from having milk cows. And so they said, this is great. No tits to pull, no hay to pitch. Just punch a hole in the son of a gun. Sometimes I can get that thing to rhyme, but not when I'm on a Baptist campus. This won't work. These kinds of little rhymes gave birth to cowboy poetry, and that's part of the cowboy culture. I've got one that I just can't resist laying on you. It's a cowboy's view of reincarnation. What is reincarnation? A cowboy asked his friend. Well, it starts, his old pal told him, when your life comes to its end. They comb your hair and wash your neck and clean your fingernails and put you in a padded box away from life's travails. Now, the box in you goes in a hole that's been dug into the ground. Reincarnation starts when you plant it beneath that mound. Them clods melt down just like that box and you who is inside. And that's when you're beginning your transformation ride. In a while, the grass will grow upon your rendered mound until someday upon that spot a lonely flower is found. And then a horse may wander by and graze upon that flower that once was you and now has become your vegetative bower. Well, the flower that the horse doth eat, along with his other feed, makes bone and fat essential to the steed. But there is a part that it can't use, so it passes through. And there it lies upon the ground, this thing that once was you. And if by chance I should pass by and see this on the ground, I'll stop a while and I'll ponder at this object that I've found, and I'll think about reincarnation and life and death and such, and I'll come away concluding, why, you ain't changed all that much. Yeah. I want to tell you about the cowboy preacher who had a whole different view of things in this reincarnation. His name was L.R. Milliken. He was born in 1853 down in southeast Texas, where the first settlers had been, and a family friend was Sam Houston. And sadly, he lost his father when he was a boy, and Houston came to the house to comfort the widow and this little boy in particular. And Houston, I don't know if you know, he had been around. He was the Indians had a name for him, called him Big Drunk. And he probably had a real problem with alcoholism. But he got married. He's 47 years old. And he married a devout Baptist lady of 22 years of age. And she started reforming. By the way, despite his late start at age 47, they had 8 kids together, 4 boys and 4 girls. And so she got him to quit drinking, which is one of the best things that could ever happen to him. And then she also finally prevailed upon him to get baptized down at Independence in a creek down there. All baptisms were in creeks in those days. And quite a crowd came around to see the great Sam Houston baptized. They were lined up, so the preacher put him down in there, dunked him up good, and brought him back up. Now, Brother Sam, your sins are washed away. And he said, well, God help the fishes. You know, but anyway, the admonition from this great Texas icon, it affected Milliken. Remembered it. His mother died when he was just 14 in 1867. And so the orphan boy was taken into Lampasas, which is where my mother's hometown. Lampasas was was right in the middle of a terrible frontier period. I wrote a book, my second to most recent book, on the frontier era in Lampasas. And they had Comanche attacks for 2 decades, and gunfighting, saloon fights like crazy, lots of rustling. And so this Milliken he liked the place. He had a rough sense of adventure, and he turned on to this place. And he wrote later, Lampasas was then a typical frontier town. It had its midnight revelers and 2-gun men aplenty, a wild, unruly set. Outlaws were common. Gambling and drinking red liquor to the order of the day. If these were insufficient excitement, the Comanches were on the warpath, and raids and killings by bands of them occurred regularly in the light of the moon. Now, he gravitated to that wild, unruly set. He rarely attended church, but he enjoyed hanging out in the saloons of Lampasas, even though he did not drink. He never drank. He remembered the words of Houston, and he wore a gun. But he said, I was an expert shot, but I held aloof from quarrels, nor did I side with any gang or make any gunplay. This is probably because I remained sober. Well, in 1870, he was just 17 at this point, he landed a job cowboying on the ranch of a big rancher near a guy named John Sparks near east of Lampasas. And he wrote this about it. Oh, man, remember, he's just 17, cowboy time. He said, bunking with a real outfit, rounding up, cutting, branding, and marking calves in the spring was new. And I fell my full length for it. Did I like it? Well, I'll say I did. And he kept that job for a couple of years. But when he was 20 in the summer of 1874, the cowboy found religion at a camp meeting in San Saba County, which is the first county to the west. Milliken felt compelled to preach. And in December 1874, he joined the First Baptist Church of Lampasas. He enrolled for a time in Baylor University, which was still located in Independence in those days. And he engaged in what he called a close and prayerful study of the New Testament to know my duty and what and how to preach. He began preaching the gospel at every opportunity. And on February 4, 1878, Milliken was ordained to the ministry at the First Baptist Church of Lampasas. He continued to live in Lampasas for several more years as he was getting his feet wet in this new profession. He married Georgia Catherine Saunders in 1878. The couple began raising a family in Lampasas. He preached once a month in Burnett. Burnett is 22 miles away. Then he founded a church farther on still in Llano. And see, the missionary spirit has has hit him. And I'll tell you what, you can go to, Timbuktu if you want to, but no place needed it worse than West Texas in those days. He became active in the affairs of the Texas Baptist Convention. He was instrumental in organizing the famous Paisano Baptist encampment near Alpine. It's conducted among cowboys and ranchers to this day, but for decades it was conducted by the legendary George W. Pruitt, who was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas for 47 years, and his first revival as a young preacher was in Lampasas. That's probably where Milliken and Truett met. Truett became internationally famous. Reverend Milliken's work eventually took him on out to West Texas, where he founded Baptist churches. Now get this, he's already founded one in Atlanta. He founds one in San Angelo, Pecos, Midland, Big Spring, El Paso, Fort Davis, way out there, Toya, other side of Pecos, Van Horn, out near El Paso, Odessa, Sierra Blanca, Clint, Fort Hancock, Presidio, and other communities. He did indeed lead the missionary life. He ranged to the far corners of West Texas to distribute Bibles and Baptist literature. And he said this about it: in the early part of my ministry, I went always on horseback, because he was a cowboy at heart. I sometimes broke in a bronc for its use in my work, making many long trips over the plains and through the mountains, sometimes with nothing but my saddle blanket for a bed, a saddle for a pillow, and the heavens for a covering. I have worn out several pairs of saddlebags, carrying good books and tracts to give away or loan. Imagine wearing out big old leather saddlebags with it. So anyway, he had a long and remarkable career as a cowboy preacher, and I thought it might be appropriate to end this program with that. It has been a great privilege for me to be on campus the last 2 days and to, again, be a part of the Manley Lecture Series. I appreciate your kind attention. It's been a lot of fun for me, and I hope you've found some